Listen, I don't think Mikula did anything wrong. There's nothing with...
Welcome back to the FrieNDA, the only YouTube channel that spent more time getting one shot in Shadow of the Erdtree. Than actually making full content. Sorry, it's been a long month. It's been a long month. Being a part of game dev Twitter is genuinely something special. One day you're watching companies and teams just dissolve right in front of you, and you're watching the industry you've dedicated your life to just start to slowly crumble around you. Then the next day, you see the most innovative game design idea you've seen in a very long time. Viewfinder is a game released in early 2023 and was directed by Matt Stark, and then continuously developed by Sad Owl Studios. A lot of people in the game dev cinematic universe, better known as the GDCU, became aware of the game when a clip went viral of a character taking a photo and then placing said photo in the space. And it was genuinely placed within the space. All the objects in the rotated photo had physics, everything moved, and it booleaned throughout the wall, and it inherently blew everyone's minds. The idea was innovative, and we weren't sure if this project would actually be able to function as a game, but luckily, it did, covering themes of existentialism, mind-bending puzzles, and just a conglomerate of a bunch of different beautiful art styles, making about 600k within the first week and receiving plenty of rave reviews, and it even got nominated for a Game of the Year award. However, there was one thing really plaguing my mind. How does one work around a mechanic like this? With taking photos of everything in your environment and your surrounding and then replacing it and creating new geometry and booleaning, which is a term used for like cutting geo with geo. And then there's a bunch of programmer stuff that means a different thing, but I'm not going through that because I'm not smart enough to go through that. But there's a bunch of technical limitations and a bunch of different workflows that you're gonna have to do in order to make things work that aren't really normal as an environment artist, right? But luckily, my very good friend decided to humor me and sat me down so I can pick his brain and figure out what you have to do to make something like this. So without further ado, here's Santeri. Alright, we're good.
Okay. We're good. Okay.
For those people that are unfamiliar with your work, do you want to explain a little bit about yourself and your history in the games industry and other projects you've worked on?
Yeah, sure. I'm a senior environment artist. Worked in games for about 9 or 10 years, depending on when you start counting. So yeah, I started working on a game called Mid-Air in early 2014, and I went on to work at Troll7 on Oli Oli World in 2020, and then I got poached eventually by Sad Owl Studios. I don't want to say poached. I'm pretty sure I just applied. Went to Sad Owl, joined them for Viewfinder in 2022, and been there ever since.
Can you tell us what exactly Viewfinder is and when you decided to join the team? Like, what was that onboarding process like? And when in the timeline of the project did you join?
Pretty sure right after they had finished their vertical slice and were ready to go into full production is when they recruited me. So I wasn't really there for any pre-production. Most of the art style was kind of set. I just joined to basically pump out content, right? Just make levels as much as possible.
So what exactly was the onboarding process like? Because it's a smaller indie studio. It was during, I guess it was still fully COVID time in 2022.
Yeah.
So like, what was that like? Because I've never worked with a studio that small, and this is their first IP too, right?
They're a fully remote studio, right? Or we are, and I've got like most of my career has been fully remote, online only studios anyway. So the COVID thing, I don't think that really affected things there. Yeah, onboarding with like small studios tends to be, a lot less formal. Obviously, like you don't get all the bureaucracy of big companies, like fill in all these forms and get onto these million different HR platforms that they always seem to want you to log on to. It was definitely a learning process, onboarding, right? Like learning all of the technical limitations, figuring out exactly how I was going to work, Because I mean that really wasn't super clear even at that point, even though I did say they sort of had things figured out. But like really figuring out the pipeline of like how are we going to get these levels from a sort of gray box to final, you know, how are we going to build that pipeline?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the very normal game dev special of we have a really solid idea of how this is going to work, but we don't really know how it's going to work, so we're just going to try and see how it inevitably works out mid development, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I guess on that note, speaking of like limitations and stuff, with the idea that you could take a picture of basically nearly anything in the level and recreate a mini instance of the photo.
Yeah.
What were some things that you really had to focus on to make sure nothing would break the game? Because I feel like I never tested this, but I kind of just thought of this earlier. Theoretically, you could take a photo of a whole landscape and then create a new instance of the said landscape, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So there's a few things, right? Right at the gate, the sort of most foundational thing in terms of just like level design and scale is that, you know, because you can essentially duplicate geometry often quite a lot. There's a couple of levels where you can essentially have infinite photos, at least one that has this sort of recursive loop where you can keep duplicating a piece of geometry forever. And because of that, and just like the photo mechanic, it just means that the levels had to be quite small, right? So it is sort of one puzzle per level, and there's I think 75, 80 levels in the game.
Yeah.
But they're fairly contained, and they have to be. Yeah, you couldn't really have any kind of open world looking thing because you just crash your PC if you try to duplicate it, maybe even once,
Just
right?
a little bit, just an entire fucking vista that goes
Yeah.
on for miles and miles for no reason.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I mean there's a sort of background vista layer of geometry that's like always there that doesn't get affected by the photos or can't get captured by the photos. Or like it does, but it gets captured as like a 2D plane essentially, I think. You know, there's mountains and clouds and stuff in the background, and you're not gonna be able to reach them and stuff like that. But yeah, so levels can't really be big. Try count or like poly count's fairly limited. There was never really any official like guidelines for like, you know, triangle counts per level or anything, or triangle count on screen. But I think most of the levels in Viewfinder ended up being like easily less than like 500,000 triangles for the entire level, right? So like fairly low poly.
That makes sense.
Because yeah, like if you can, you know, take a photo of the entire level and then duplicate it.
I imagine during testing, someone tried to do that almost immediately.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to
And
see
in
how
some
quickly
levels,
you
like
could
you do
break the
still
fucking game.
like duplicate quite a bit of geometry, right? Because like the camera frustum, especially because it like, you know, it essentially extends into infinity, right, in the depth axis. You know, if you had really big levels, then you'd just be capturing an absolute shit ton of stuff.
I remember when that one clip went viral on the Twitter sphere, because I refuse to call it X. Everyone was just trying to figure it out. It's such a cool mechanic to see. And I think the only person that would know how to do it is your main creative director and like your lead who would set all that up. But it's
Basically our
really smart mechanic.
Yeah, it's our creative director Matt who originally prototyped it, and then it's our principal programmer Jacob Keane who, as far as I understand, sort of actually made it work in production, right? Like I'm pretty sure he made it like over 10 times faster and stuff like that, right? So like yeah, and that's the other thing, I guess, in terms of like optimization and like performance considerations, we really weren't ever like concerned with like how the game actually runs, you know, when you're just walking around, right? That's again because like it's not that, you know, it's not really that complex visually or anything. But what was the sort of concern was the like when you take a photo or place a photo, right? Like that could not go above a certain. But then but if you put like way too much geo into a level, then taking photos would become a lot slower because obviously you're going to have to process a lot more geo. So other like sort of key workflow, all measures have to be watertight, really important, right? You can't really boolean any object that's like has an open face, right? It'll very often go to shit. So every mesh has to be watertight, except for some stuff like decals or some one-sided planes are fine in some cases, right? Watertight, and that again that ensures that the meshes actually get sort of sliced properly. You don't get any ugly geo artifacts. One material per mesh, which is kind of a crazy limitation, but yeah. In a normal setting, you might do some kind of wall, or in a normal game production, you might do some kind of wall module maybe that has like a bunch of different materials, right? You'll do like a wood and maybe a stone with wood trims and maybe some metal trims as well and stuff like that, all on the same mesh, and it probably won't have to be watertight. Viewfinder kind of completely different, where materials kind of have to be one material per mesh, and then kind of with most things we tried to make it so what we call cross sections, which are the sort of new faces that are generated when you slice through an object, right? You get this new, brand new dynamically created face or polygon or set of polygons, right? If you had multiple materials per object, then you couldn't really determine what that cross section looks like in terms of what textures, what material it has. Where on some props you will see this in the game if you really look hard enough, is that if you have a prop with this like standard sort of uniquely textured, where you've got just the same unique textures that have metal bits here and then wood bits here and yada yada yada, maybe plastic bits here, all in the same texture, same material. If you then slice through it, you will see that all of those materials have the exact same cross-section material, because you can't do it any other way. And then again, because of this and because of the watertight thing, that means that we would end up modeling quite a bit of sort of extra geometry, right? Like a concrete wall that's then with a wood paneling thing. That wood paneling is a whole mesh that has actual thickness to it, and has the sort of backside, and then the wood or the concrete as well. Yeah, so that if you slice through it, you'll actually see those materials. And yeah, and some props as well. We just sort of model the insides when we had the time and when it makes sense.
Throughout this whole thing, I've been fairly understanding the process of it, and these weird, very, very specific edge cases and problems you would have to solve as an artist. And I'm sitting, and now I'm at the point where I'm like, fuck, that's I just hear my brain starting to fry in a good way. I'm just like, damn, that's just thinking about all these different edge cases throughout the entire production cycle must have been really fulfilling in a way, because now it's oh, I know what to do if we continue to expand out, whether it be with Viewfinder or another game that somehow implements this mechanic to a larger scale. It's just really cool to understand and or just hear this side of everything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and
Okay.
Yeah, I think in a way again, luckily, these restrictions were pretty figured out by the time I got here. Right, I didn't need to sit down and figure all this stuff out. Yeah, it was definitely still a struggle, and we had pretty good internal tools for checking that every mesh is watertight and giving us warnings if there's more than one material per mesh and stuff like that. Those debug tools can only go so far. By the time we were sort of done, quote unquote, with production, had to do a massive cleanup pass going through the entire game and making sure we actually caught all the errors, and go back to a prop you made in a hurry 3 months ago and shit, there's a triangle missing here, and so it's giving me a watertight error, stuff like that. And the watertight tools aren't perfect. They would sometimes complain about get false positives, but not often. Yeah.
Damn. That fuck. Sorry, I kind of locked in listening to what you were saying. I forgot what I was gonna ask right after.
I did have some notes that I didn't yet
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, all the stuff we talked about earlier, but then I guess when you sent me this question, I sort of interpreted in a way where is there something that sort of stuck with me even afterwards? And so that's kind of what I wrote down here, is that
Go for it.
Living in this weird Viewfinder world with these restrictions of watertight meshes and one material per mesh, I think it's kind of messed with my brain and my intuitions for 3D, where in my personal projects, I'll steer towards that more intuitively, I'll sort of forget that, actually most games don't have these restrictions and I don't actually need to worry about them, because I've just been, doing this for quite a while now, and yeah, it's sort of, hold on, I think it's actually worth even saying. I guess I'll say this now as well. Since there's like other sort of permanent adjustments, or there's things I learned during the production, right? Is that it sort of reinforced my belief that like always kind of build a pipeline, even for yourself, even for personal projects. You should always look to set up your own asset pipeline. Assuming it's not like just a couple of props, but like set things up. Be clean about your production, even if it's just your personal portfolio stuff. And like, because once you've set that up and figured it out, then it's just much easier to go through actual production of when you have to work on an actual game and make like 200 props or something over the course of the project, or like I don't know how many props I did. I didn't work on that many props actually on Viewfinder, because we did have a dedicated prop artists, but still made up I don't know, a few dozen at least, right? And then like 50 of the levels in the game, so over half of the levels in the game are my work. So there's a lot of stuff that I worked on, and so like the speed was essential, right? I think that maybe I should emphasize that a bit more. It's just that like they kind of brought me on, and who knows if this is why they hired me, but like working previously in Oli sort of taught me that like this sort of kind of a strict production pipeline of Oli World had like 120-ish levels, 100 levels, I don't know. And I worked on like a quarter of those. You have around 3 or 4 days to work on per level, from grey box to final. That's not a lot of time. So like
Wait, only 3 to 4 days for Oli?
Yeah, something like that. Sometimes 5. And then I think we scheduled like 1 day extra per level for polish at the end.
Okay.
And it was doable. We had good tools for Oli. We didn't make like basically any or very rarely did we make like unique geo for new levels, right? We had a asset library kind of thing for each of the 5 zones in Oli, and then you get your grey box and you get maybe some rough idea from narrative about what's in this level, and then you just go and start populating it and try to make it look good. But so that I don't want to call it a grueling dev cycle, because it definitely wasn't. Like at Earl 7 they were really careful about not putting us through overtime or anything like that, but it was still like fairly tight. And so all of that learning then came with me to Viewfinder, and it was kind of the same here, right? Like rare that I would spend even a week on a level, because I did. There's a lot of levels to work on. Also, I mean, we worked on sort of passes on Viewfinder as well, right? Where that was actually a really good workflow. That it's kind of hard sometimes to organize production like that. Like, oh, let's just bring every level up to like 70% at first throughout the entire game, and then come back and polish. But I'm kind of a firm believer in that. Like, that's kind of how you have to do, to some extent, you have to organize indie development like this, where you bring things up to like 78%, where it's like probably good enough, and then at the end you come back and you do a polish pass if you can, because the 80-20 rule or whatever it is, you spend, what even is it, you get diminishing returns as the more and more you polish, right? Like you end up spending much more and more time.
Perpetually chip at something until
either
way you just hate it as an artist, and then everyone's like, no, it's fine, you can just stop.
Yeah, exactly, right. Like almost no one is gonna notice. And actually something being 95% finished and shipping is almost always good enough.
Like most game developers, we went significantly over time, but there was a lot of really good information shared in this conversation. So just to make sure we don't go too off topic, I'm going to end the Viewfinder conversation here because we really deviated going forward after this. So what I'm gonna do tomorrow, or maybe later today if I'm feeling zesty, I'm gonna upload the full conversation in like a podcast format, so that way everyone can hear everything that was said in a relatively unedited format, and you can always like figure out more and then just learn more about environment art and the conversation and how to grow as an artist. If anything's pigeonholing me, a bunch of cool stuff like that. We go really in depth going forward throughout the rest of the topic. So I'm going to cut it here. Thank you, Santeri, for sharing all this information. Thank you, everyone at SOS, for allowing Santeri to share all this information with us today. All of his socials are going to be on my face and in the description below thingy. The conversation will continue on the podcast. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you like this new style. Comment what can be improved. This is the first time I'm trying something like this. Do we want more shitposting meme edits? Do you want more classically chill content? What other game dev discipline do you want to see going forward? And I will reach out to a bunch of people who don't hate me, and we can figure it out from there. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be good people. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.